All right, top of the hour. Good morning, everyone. I'm Poppy Harlow.
And I'm Jim Shooter. We are in Washington this morning for the first cabinet-level confirmation hearing of this brand new Congress. And what a place to start. Yeah. Keep in mind this essential fact. President Trump fired his previous Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, for failing to rein in the Mueller probe and is now likely replacing him with someone who called a central part of that investigation, quote, fatally misconceived. The nominee is William Barr, up for what would be his second stint as Attorney General. He spent 2 years as AG under the first President Bush, but this time, if confirmed, he will take the helm of a Justice Department that is investigating the man who nominated him. Barr will oversee the special counsel whose probe into potential obstruction of justice he has attacked as recently as last summer.
Yeah, just about 6 months ago. In his opening statement to the Senate Judiciary Committee this morning, you'll hear that at the bottom of this hour, Barr will pledge, and I quote, Bob Mueller will be allowed to complete his work. Moreover, again, quoting here, it is very important that the public and Congress be informed of the results of the special counsel's work. Now, you can bet he will be hammered on his word choice there. What does he mean? Is the public actually going to see the entire report or just be told what's in it? And you can expect Democrats to press really hard on that. We are surrounded by A-list colleagues. What else this morning as we count down to the opening gavel? Let's begin with Laura Jarrett on his background. So, look, this is an attorney general who has a lot of experience, obviously under Bush 41, who has a particular worldview and a particularly important legal view as it pertains to this president.
That's right. I think the big takeaway is that Bill Barr doesn't just see himself as serving at the pleasure of the president. He sees himself as the president's lawyer. And he has such an expansive view of executive power that the way it intersects with the Russia investigation, given that the president's campaign is under investigation still, given that the president is under investigation for obstruction of justice, is the real thing I think Democrats are going to hone in on today. Yeah. And yesterday he released a portion of what he plans to say to try to get out ahead of all of this. And I wanted to zero in just on one part where he talks about how important it is for the public to be informed of the results of the investigation. Doesn't say he's going to make the whole report open to the public, but he also says, I can assure you where judgments are to be made by me. And that's important. And it's sort of a subtle distinction. But what he's saying there is, what if the president has a judgment? So I think Democrats are going to be pressing there. Where are the limits and what happens when someone else wants to substitute their judgment?
Yeah, it's interesting because this issue of executive power came up in his last confirmation hearings nearly 30 years ago. And again, he was asked at the time about this very expansive view. As you know, those pictures we showed just a moment ago are live pictures of that nominee, the nominee William Barr, arriving there. I want to bring in CNN senior congressional correspondent Manu Raju. He is on Capitol Hill. Manu, the key here is really Republicans in the larger Senate here, and is there any wobbling of support among Republicans? Because fact is, the president has a majority in the Senate. Do you see that from your perch?
Not at this point, but that's what Democrats hope today's hearing may lead to. They believe if William Barr does not give any sort of ironclad commitments for the Mueller probe, maybe if there are questions about his independence from the president, and if he does not agree to potentially even recuse himself in certain situations, Democrats hope that perhaps they can convince some Republicans to defect and vote against William Barr's nomination. Of course, there's no evidence that it's going to happen yet, but that's why a huge focus among the Democrats on this committee today will be focusing on the Mueller investigation. Will he allow the president, for instance, to be subpoenaed, if necessary, by the Mueller investigation? Would he step aside if the ethics attorneys say that he should, in fact, do so? What about these conversations that he had with the president and the president's legal team, whose memo, Barr distributed his memo criticizing the obstruction element of the Mueller probe? What conversations did he have with the president's legal team in the run-up to all this? If Democrats believe that he's evasive, if some Republicans believe that he's evasive on this, perhaps that could affect his votes in the larger Senate. So a lot of his prospects hinge on his performance today. And also, it'll be interesting to watch on this committee some potential 2020 contenders themselves, having their turn in the spotlight of sorts. Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, 3 Democrats, as well as the new chairman, the Republican chairman of this committee. We'll watch his performance here today, Lindsey Graham, who's first time behind holding the gavel on this very committee, and 2 female Republican senators joining this panel too, Joni Ernst, as well as Marsha Blackburn. So a lot of new dynamics to this committee, but all eyes will be on how he answers those questions about the Mueller investigation, its independence, and whether he can shore up Republican support in particular in this hearing.
All 4 of those voices were very strong ones during the Kavanaugh hearings. You could expect similar today. Manu Raju, thanks very much. Forgive us, there's a lot of news every day. Do not miss the significance of this story. This morning, the New York Times reporting that President Trump has considered pulling the U.S. out of the NATO alliance. You really cannot underestimate the importance, not just of this prospect, but even the discussion of this prospect in light of the threat that Russia currently poses to Europe and the United States. I mean, it's a remarkable story.
And in light of what Russia did to this, our election, the U.S. withdrawal, if that were to actually happen, just sit with that for a moment, it would weaken a key alliance. And it is just a huge gift to Vladimir Putin. CNN Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr joins us now. And when you talk about a gift to Vladimir Putin, retired Admiral James Stavridis, the former Supreme Commander of NATO, quoted in the New York Times this morning saying, even discussing this, Barbara, even discussing leaving NATO, let alone actually doing it, just talking about it is the gift of the century, in his words, for Vladimir Putin.
Well, good morning, Poppy and Jim. And I think that is probably something that an awful lot of military commanders and top Pentagon officials are concerned about at this point. Look, Vladimir Putin, the intelligence community will tell you, is not giving up on his own agenda on the national security stage. He would like nothing better than to drive a wedge between the U.S. and NATO, see NATO break apart in some fashion. And he, is not going to pull back on that. President Trump may be playing right into that Putin agenda. The president has talked repeatedly, we all know, about his concerns about NATO, that he doesn't think they're paying their fair share, in his view, questioning NATO. But this time, it comes against the backdrop of that Russian agenda. Putin not pulling back. The president, again, publicly apparently talking about the potential for leaving NATO. And so where does that leave the alliance? What it would mean if it were to come to pass, if Congress could not stop it or did not want to stop it, it means that you break apart the fundamental security structure that has existed since the end of World War II, that the U.S. no longer has that pledge under NATO to come to the defense of Europe and Canada, the NATO partners, if they are attacked. It has been since World War II. An attack on one is an attack on all. We saw that after 9/11. So right now, a lot of concern, because when the president raises something, it may go away for a while, but he always brings it back. And there is concern this is another idea he'll bring back.
All right, Barbara Starr, important reporting. Huge story this morning, not to be missed. Thanks.
Well, the issue of the day, of course, the Barr hearings. Let's discuss this now with our all-star panel here. Jeffrey Toobin, if I could begin with you. So in advance of this hearing, Bill Barr has said, one, he wants at least the results of the investigation made public. Whether that's the full report, we don't know, and that Mueller should be allowed to finish his work. Reconcile that with his prior very public statements criticizing essential parts of this probe.
Well, what you will certainly hear a lot from Mr. Barr today is that his memo, his 19-page memo, was about one narrow issue. It was about whether the president can be investigated and prosecuted for obstruction of justice for firing James Comey.
But that's not a narrow. I mean, it's quite a significant part of this investigation.
It is a significant part of the investigation, but it is not the Russia part of the investigation. And the interesting line he will attempt to draw is, well, I thought that as a private citizen, but that doesn't mean I'm going to interfere with the investigation. He's going to do what he's going to do. Whether he can manage to maintain both positions, I thought it as a private citizen, but I'm not going to interfere, that's going to be one of the challenges he faces. Yeah.
So the natural follow-up to that for these lawmakers would be, okay, the words you used in this memo that you just wanted to write, by the way, no one compelled you to write this at the Department of Justice 6 months ago or so, are asinine, fatally misconceived, a sideshow, grossly irresponsible. If you felt that about obstruction then, are you saying you don't feel it now, right? Isn't he going to have to answer that? You may say you won't interfere, but do you still feel that way?
That's why you do what you do. You ask good questions.
I'm just saying,
I don't know what he's going to say. Look, I think it's important to remember there are 53 Republicans in the Senate.
Yeah.
He's going to get confirmed.
Yeah.
But how much he has to dance during this hearing will be very interesting. Fortunately, the senators are not as good questioners as Poppy Harlow, so, it is...
Hey, Mom, I hope you're watching.
Laura, Jared, and Pamela, both your thoughts on this. How much leeway does the Attorney General have to set kind of guardrails for the special counsel's investigation, short of firing Robert Mueller, which he says he's not going to do? Where can he make judgments to rein it in?
On a subpoena. That's a big
subpoena
one.
to the president.
Yeah, and we have no indication that they want to go there. I should point that out. But on a subpoena, on the purse strings, I mean, the whole point of setting up this particular regulation was in response to the independent counsel statute. And the idea was to put in guardrails so that the special counsel was answerable to the attorney general. So he wasn't just sort of on a rogue mission out on his own. And so I think in this case, in particular, not just some of the more everyday aspects of it, but really when it comes to what happens with the report. That is in the sole discretion, if confirmed, in Bill Barr's hands. He can make sure no one sees it ever. He can make sure certain persons are redacted. He could get, an executive summary. All of that is completely going to be up to him, and that's why it's really so critical, I think, to test where those boundaries are.
You can see one of those Washington documents with a lot of black lines through it, right?
Yeah, totally.
Pam, similar thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's going to be the big question. A couple of things, as you point out, the subpoena, what is he going to do? Our latest reporting is that just in recent weeks, Robert Mueller went to Trump's legal team, asked to talk with the president in person, to ask follow-up questions in addition to those written questions, and the Trump legal team rebuffed him. So the question is, what would Bill Barr do if Robert Mueller wants to subpoena the president for an interview? You can expect that to be raised today. Also, the report, of course, as you pointed out, the big question is, what is he going to do? The way he put it in his opening statement was very lawyerly. He said, I will make sure the results are transparent. So does that just mean if the president isn't going to be charged, that's what's is that the only thing that's going to be out there? And if you look at the regulations, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's nothing specific in there that the report has to be handed over to Congress or to the public. And he made clear in his opening statement that he's going to follow the law. And so I think you're really going to see Democrats in particular pick that apart.
So, Mark Preston, to you, in this letter, he wrote a letter to Dianne Feinstein, the ranking Democrat on the committee, and also the new chairman, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. And we saw that letter yesterday. And in it, he discusses how when he wrote this memo back in June, he sent it to the White House and, had discussions about it with the president's own lawyers back then, and then subsequently has discussed it with the president when he was tapped for this. That's a big deal, is it not?
Yeah, but it comes back to the tap dancing that Jeffrey was talking about. He's going to go in, and we should point out he's been through these hearings before. He's an old Washington hand. Yeah. He knows how to answer questions and how not to answer questions. But your point, Poppy, and this is a line out of the CNN.com story talking about the hearing today, that I do think that Democrats, if they're successful in anything in dinging him up, it would be on this alone. President Trump's interactions with ex-FBI Director James Comey would not constitute obstruction of justice because the president has, quote unquote, plenary power over law enforcement and, quote unquote, complete authority to stop or start a law enforcement proceeding. That's a about he's going to go in, and we should point out he's been through these hearings before. He's an old Washington hand. Yeah. He knows how to answer questions and how not to answer questions. But your point, Poppy, and this is a line out of the CNN.com story talking about the hearing today, that I do think that Democrats, if they're successful in anything in dinging him up, it would be on this alone. President Trump's interactions with ex-FBI Director James Comey would not constitute obstruction of justice because the president has, quote unquote, plenary power over law enforcement and, quote unquote, complete authority to stop or start a law enforcement proceeding. That's amazing. I mean, that just goes back to basically saying the president has become a king and has absolute authority.
That's a quote of Barr's.
Yeah, and that's from his memo. So if you go back and when you talk about the president's backers, they always talk about the Constitution and say we're constitutionalists. Fairly certain that the founding fathers didn't want the president of the United States to have absolute power, which is basically what Barr was saying.
And if I could just, emphasize the point you're making here. Let's say if you believe the president can open or close any criminal investigation, fire the FBI director for any reason, does that mean if someone walks into the Oval Office and says, here's a suitcase full of cash, fire the FBI director and you can keep the cash? Is that constitutional?
Yeah.
I don't think that's what. But if you believe literally what Barr is saying there, he seems to be saying that.
Well, it's a larger question because Watergate.
Go back and you know, when you talk about the president's backers, they always talk about the Constitution and say we're constitutionalists. Fairly certain that the founding fathers didn't want the president of the United States to have absolute power, which is basically what Barr was saying.
And if I could just, you know, emphasize the point you're making here. Let's say if you believe the president can open or close any criminal investigation, fire the FBI director for any reason, does that mean if someone walks into the Oval Office and says, here's a suitcase full of cash, fire the FBI director and you can keep the cash? Is that constitutional?
Yeah.
I don't think that's what. But if you believe literally what Barr is saying there, he seems to be saying that's true.
Well, it's a larger question because Watergate essentially settled that question.
And he brings up Nixon.
The president was not
memo.
above the law.
Right.
And I think just in talking to friends of Bill Barr, what I'm hearing from them and what you're likely going to hear from him today is that he will make clear that while he thinks the president has wide latitude, he doesn't believe the president is above the law, and he does think that a president can obstruct justice, just not in this particular example of firing the FBI director.
All right,
Listen,
stay with us.
There's a lot to discuss there, and we're going to be.
We're going to be right here. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. We're on top of a lot this morning. Of course, the high-stakes hearing that is about to begin, so stay with us for that.
Plus, remember this other story in Washington? Shutdown, day 25, and a new tactic from the White House. Sources telling CNN that the administration is inviting moderate Democrats to a meeting. Can he sway them? Will they even show up? And Republican Steve King faced the party after what are just his latest racist comments.
Well, you see some members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There's Senator John Kennedy right there as they get ready for the significant hearing to begin in about 10 minutes, the confirmation hearing of the president's pick for Attorney General William Barr.
That was a particularly young member of the Senate Judiciary Committee there. Looked about 9 or 10.
The 7-year-old
I'm assuming that's a relative of the senator that there are changes we're not aware of. Another story today we're, of course, following closely. Day 25 of the partial government shutdown, and President Trump hoping to break his stalemate with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi by appealing to moderate House Democrats. CNN's Phil Mattingly joining us now live from Capitol Hill. Phil, President Trump hoping to peel off some support, but is he finding any interest?
Yeah, first off, Jim, does that young member, the 9 or 10-year-old, have any ideas to end the shutdown? Because I think there's about 535 members of Congress who would be interested in any idea to end the shutdown. Look, what you're hearing from the White House right now is they're going to deploy a strategy you've actually seen from administrations in the past, which is you go after vulnerable members, particularly those who won in districts that President Trump won in 2016, that perhaps might be frustrated, that perhaps might be worried about their political future, and therefore might be on the table to pull to your side. And that's what the White House is going to do. They sent out invitations last night to a group of House Democrats, mainly folks from the Blue Dog Caucus, the Problem Solvers Caucus, kind of this moderate core group of Democrats, to come over and have a discussion about border security. Here's the issue right now with that strategy, at least as far as I'm told. I've been talking to Democratic aides the last 24 hours or so, see, like, look, have you seen any movement? Do you feel like there's an opening here for the White House? And the unified answer is no. In fact, leaders say, go ahead, have that meeting, because their view is that at this moment, there has been no daylight. There's no daylight between Democrats in the Senate. There's no daylight between Democrats in the House. You've seen leadership stick together on both chambers as well. And so they feel confident by where they're standing, basically because the threshold has been this. Democrats say, we're happy to have a discussion about border security, have to reopen the government first. It's the government's closure that most, particularly freshman Democrats who came here to get things done, are most frustrated about, not necessarily the wall or border security. This is all happening as Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans, rank and file guys, are at least trying to meet to try and shake something loose. I'm told a meeting that took place last night behind closed doors, more than a dozen senators Lindsey Graham happened in Joe Manchin's basement hideaway, trying to figure out some pathway forward. I'm told it was not a very good meeting. It was serious senators trying to figure out proposals, but as long as kind of the dynamics remain the same, leadership dug in, Democrats unable to figure out what the president would agree to, and the government remaining closed, rank and file efforts to the best of their ability, even if they have them, so far, guys, are not bearing fruit and are unlikely to, I'm told, at any point in the near future.
Gosh, I was just thinking about walking through the TSA line coming here into D.C. So thankful for them. They're going to work. They're doing their job. They're not getting paid so that we can go where we need to go while Washington just can't figure it out.
Members of the Coast Guard, too, now.
Unreal. Phil, thanks very much. A rare bipartisan moment in Washington as Congressman Steve King of Iowa rebuked publicly and removed from his assigned committees. The House could also vote as early today on a disapproval resolution against him.
The condemnation comes after King made overtly racist remarks, which he now says were misunderstood. Joining us now, CNN Politics congressional reporter Lauren Fox. Lauren, amazingly, still no apology from King for this, trying to find a way to defend himself, even as the Republican Party comes down hard on him.
That's right. We're outside of Steve King's office this morning, Jim, and no sign of the congressman at this point. But we should say Republicans widely disapprove of these comments. We have statements coming from Majority Leader Mitch McConnell over in the Senate, the other side of the Capitol, saying there is no place in the Republican Party for Steve King's comments. And he's not the only one. Mitt Romney saying that the congressman should step aside, and Chris Stewart, a congressman from Utah, saying last night that at this point, without any of those committee assignments, the bread and butter of a Republican member of Congress, how you prove to constituents back home that you're getting work done. Without those committee assignments, Chris Stewart had this to say about what Steve King's next steps should be.
I wish he'd resign, frankly. Like I said, he can't do the work. He's lost the trust and faith of his comrades. For the good of the party, for the good of the American people, I think it's time for us to make a change.
And Steve King today, still defiant, putting out a statement last night saying that he thinks the decision not to seat him on any of his committees was a political one. We're going to be standing outside his office hoping that the congressman comes by so we can get more of a reaction from him today.
Yeah, pretty remarkable to see members of his party asking for him to resign.
Yes.
And you've seen it from more than one.
Can I just say one thing about Steve King? I mean, let's remember that Steve King was chairman of the subcommittee on the Constitution just a few weeks ago.
True.
So the idea that the Republicans have suddenly discovered that he holds these horrible views,
it's a fair point.
I mean,
and he's made comments in this category before. We should note. Thanks very much to Lauren Fox on the Hill. Moments from now, high-stakes showdown on Capitol Hill. Senate Judiciary Committee preparing to grill Bill Barr, President Trump's nominee for Attorney General. We're going to bring you the hearings live as they begin in just moments.
Yep, just minutes away. We're also minutes away from the opening bell on Wall Street. Stock set to rise. The Dow up just slightly this morning. Of course, a lot of eyes are on the UK. Today is a decision day, a crucial vote on Brexit this afternoon. That will rattle markets, depending on which way it goes. We're on that. Stay with us.
Welcome back. These are live pictures. That is Orrin Hatch entering the room, recently retired. This is the first confirmation hearing he has not been involved in some time. There is William Barr, the president's nominee for Attorney General, ready to face hard questions from Democrats, certainly. Some supportive statements, I imagine, from Republicans here. And look at this list of folks who will be involved. Three, count them, three likely presidential candidates in 2020. Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, as well as a new chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Lindsey Graham. Not someone who is known to stay quiet in events like this.
Well put, my friend. And Orrin Hatch is going to give sort of the opening remarks here. Obviously, he served for a long time on this committee. As we wait for them to gavel in, Laura Jarrett, to you. When Bill Barr went through this, years ago, he was actually very candid and honest on at least one answer on Roe versus Wade. Will we see that candor today?
I think that's one of the big questions is what is he willing to be that transparent about, and what repercussions does it have for him? The numbers are in his favor here. I think many people expect that he will get confirmed given the Republican majority, barring any crazy things that are unforeseen that we don't see here. Obviously, on Roe versus Wade, he predicted that it will get overturned eventually, saying it doesn't have any constitutional underpinnings in his view. But there's also immigration, there's criminal justice reform, something that people like Senator Grassley, a Republican, cares very deeply about. And so I think that there are issues here where there could be sticking points for some Republicans, but he'll still probably get
not to mention an ongoing investigation of this president. Mark Preston, is William Barr going to be able to give confidence to Democrats about the future of the Mueller investigation?
No, and even if they did privately hold it, they certainly won't publicly show it, because that won't work well for the politics of the situation we're in right now. And quite frankly, as we look at Congress, the minority has a lot of power, that we don't see over on the House side. Senate Democrats have got to show that their oversight power still means something, because if you look at what we're going to come out of the gate with the House Democrats right now, Senate Democrats have got to show at least their voters and their supporters that they're willing to ask the hard questions.
And we look at Lindsey Graham, the new chair, sitting there right alongside the former chair of this committee, Chuck Grassley, Pamela Brown. The White House has maintained, that memo that Barr wrote saying that a key part of the Mueller probe is totally misguided, had nothing to do with him being chosen. What's your reporting on that?
Well, I mean, look, this is definitely going to be brought up, I think it's safe to say, during this hearing, because we've now learned that he didn't just share that memo saying that the obstruction probe firing James Comey was fatally misconceived, I believe is what he said. He didn't just share it with top DOJ officials. He shared it even wider, including with White House lawyers. And so you would...
And there we go. Chairman gaveling it in. Let's listen.
You're not going to get a good shot of me, so thank you all. So happy New Year, new Congress, and we'll see how this goes. Recognize Senator Grassley.
Okay. I do this as a point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that courtesy of you and the members. This is the first meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee in this 116th Congress. It's also the first time that we convene while my friend Lindsey Graham holds the gavel and will proceed to be chairman. So I'd like to congratulate the new chairman, thank him for his leadership, and say that I look forward to working with you and other members of this committee as we seek to address some of our nation's most pressing problems. I have every confidence that you'll steer our 200-year-old committee in the right direction.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. In my view, nobody looks over 100, so we're actually we're aging well as a committee. The bottom line is, how do you get this job? Your colleagues have to vote for you. Thank you. You have to get reelected and outlive the person to your right. So I've been able to do that. And I look forward to working with Senator Feinstein, who I have a lot of affection and fondness for. She, to me, represents a seriousness that the body needs and a demeanor that I think we should all aspire to. To the new colleagues, Senator Hawley, Blackburn, and Ernst, thank you for being part of this committee. To Senator Blackburn and Ernst, thank you for making history, I think, on our side. As to the hopes and dreams for this committee, to get as much done as possible and to fight when we have to over things that matter to the public and show two different views of an issue that's important, but do it as respectfully as possible. Sentencing reform, criminal justice reform was a very big deal. And this committee delivered for the country. Senator Durbin, I want to thank you very, very much for working with Senator Lee and Senator Grassley and Senator Booker. That's a big deal that's going to change lives, I think, in a positive way. So this committee has within it the ability to do big things long overdue. I know Senator Blackburn wants to do something on social media. Senator Klobuchar's got some ideas about how to make sure if you put an ad up on social media, you have to stand by it. We're all worried about the social media platforms being hijacked by terrorists and bad actors throughout the international world. We're worried about privacy. Do you really know what you're signing up for when you get on one of these platforms? I'd like this committee working with Commerce to see if we can find some way to tame the Wild West. Intellectual property, Senator Tillis and Senator Coons have some ideas that I look forward to hearing about. Senator Sass wants to make sure that we act ethically. You got a package of ethic reforms, and I look forward to working with you there. On this side, I know there are a lot of ideas that I'm sure that if we sat down and talked, we could embrace, and I look forward to solving as many problems as we can and having a contest over ideas that really matter to the American people. Senator Hatch, thank you for coming. In terms of my chairmanship, if I can do what you and Senator Grassley were able to do during your time, I will have done the committee a good service. Senator Grassley, thank you very much. Last year was tough, but I think you and Senator Feinstein did the best you could in the environment in which we live. The times in which we live are very difficult times. I don't see them getting better overnight, but I do see them getting better if we all want them to. So about me, I want us to do better, and I'll be as measured as possible. The immigration Lindsay will show up, but the other guy's there too, and I don't like him any more than you do. So the bottom line is we're starting off with something that would be good for the country. We have a vacancy for the Attorney General spot. We have a chance to fill that vacancy. Mr. Barr, you can't hold a job. When you look at what he's done in his life, it's incredible. So I want to thank the President for nominating somebody who is worthy of the job, who will understand on day one what the job is about, and can right the ship over there. I think we all have concerns. I know Senator Whitehouse is passionate about cybersecurity and Fort Cyber and all these other ideas that Sheldon has been pushing. It's just a matter of time before we hit hard if somebody doesn't step up to the plate with some solutions. But a little bit about the nominee. He's been Attorney General before, from 91 to 93, by voice vote. Those were the days. Deputy Attorney General from 90 to 91, unanimous consent without a recorded vote. Assistant Attorney General, Office of Legal Counsel, voice vote. That's pretty amazing. I think you're going to have an actual vote this time. Academically gifted, George Washington Law School, Columbia University undergraduate. Outside of DOJ, he was the General Counsel, Legislative Counsel for the CIA. That's how he met Bush 41. He's been a law clerk. He's worked in private practice. I'm not going to bore the committee with all the things he's done. He's been the Senior Vice President, General Counsel of GTE. He's lived a consequential life, General Counsel for Verizon. You've lived a life that I think has been honorable and noteworthy and accomplished, and I want to thank you for being willing to take this task on. We got a lot of problems at the Department of Justice. I think morale is low, and we need to change that. So I look forward to this hearing. You will be challenged. You should be challenged. The memo, there will be a lot of talk about it, as there should be. But I just want to let you know, Mr. Barr, that we appreciate you stepping up at a time when the country needs somebody of your background and your temperament to be in charge of the rule of law. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want you to know I really look forward to working with you.
Too.
And I think we can work productively together. And Senator Grassley, I want to thank you for the time we worked together. It really was a pleasure, and I had an opportunity to get to know you as the fine person that you are. So thank you very much. I want to say just one word or two or three about women. 25 years ago, there were no women on this committee. I'll never forget watching the Anita Hill hearing on a television in the London airport with a lot of people gathered around. So I went over to take a look, and I saw this all-male Judiciary Committee. And it took all these years, but here we are. And I want to particularly welcome Senator Ernst and Senator Blackburn I think it's extraordinarily important that this committee be representative of our society at large, and we are growing that way. And so thank you very much for being here. I'd also like to welcome Bill Barr and his family. I know you're proud to be here, and you served as Attorney General before from 91 to 93, and I think we all have great respect for your commitment to public service. When we met, your previous tenure marked a very different, we talked about a very different time for our country, and today we find ourselves in a unique time with a different administration and different challenges. And now, perhaps more than ever before, the country needs someone who will uphold the rule of law, defend the independence of the Justice Department, and truly understand their job is to serve as the people's lawyer, not the president's lawyer. Top of mind for all of us is the ongoing Mueller investigation. Importantly, the Attorney General must be willing to resist political pressure and be committed to protecting this investigation. I'm pleased that in our private meeting, as well as in your written statement submitted to the committee, you stated that it's vitally important, and this is a quote, that the special counsel be allowed to complete his investigation, end quote, and that, quote, the public and Congress be informed of the results of the special counsel's work, end quote. However, there are at least two aspects of Mr. Mueller's investigation. First, Russian interference in the United States election, and whether any U.S. persons were involved in that interference. And second, possible obstruction of justice. It's the second component that you have written on. And just 5 months before you were nominated, I spent the weekend on your 19-page legal memo to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein criticizing Mueller's investigation, specifically the investigation into potential obstruction of justice. In the memo, you conclude, I think, that Special Counsel Mueller is, quote, grossly irresponsible for pursuing an obstruction case against the president. And pursuing the obstruction inquiry is fatally misconceived. So I hope we can straighten that out in this hearing. But your memo also shows a large sweeping view of presidential authority and a determined effort, I thought, to undermine Bob Mueller, even though you state you have been friends and are in the dark about many of the facts of the investigation. So it does raise questions about your willingness to reach conclusions before knowing the facts and whether you prejudge the Mueller investigation. And I hope you'll make that clear today. It also raises a number of serious questions about your views on executive authority and whether the president is, in fact, above the law. For example, you wrote the president, and I quote, alone is the executive branch. As such, he is the sole repository of all executive powers conferred by the Constitution. Thus, the full measure of law enforcement authority is placed in the president's hands, and no limit is placed on the kinds of cases subject to his control and supervision. This is in your memo on page 10, and I will ask you about it. This analysis included cases involving potential misconduct, where you concluded, and I quote, the president may exercise his supervisory authority over cases dealing with his own interests, and the president transgresses no legal limitation when he does so. That's on page 12. In fact, you went so far as to conclude that, quote, the framers' plan contemplates that the president's law enforcement powers extend to all matters, including those in which he has a personal stake. You also wrote the Constitution itself places no limit on the president's authority to act on matters which concern him or his own conduct, page 10. Later, you conceded that certain supervisory actions, such as the firing of Director Comey, may be unlawful obstruction. However, this too is qualified. You argue that in such a case, obstruction of justice occurs only if first a prosecutor proves that the president or his aides colluded with Russia. Specifically, you conclude, and I quote, "The issue of obstruction only becomes ripe after the alleged collusion by the president or his campaign is established first," end quote. So that's some of the things I hope to ask you about. And in conclusion, let me just say that some of your past statements on the role of Attorney General and presidential power are concerning. For instance, you've said in the past that the Attorney General is the president's lawyer. In November of 2017, you made comments suggesting it would be permissible for the president to direct the Justice Department to open an investigation into his political opponents. And this is notable in light of President Trump's repeated calls for the investigation of Hillary Clinton and others who disagree with him. I believe it's important that the next Attorney General be able to strongly resist pressure, whether from the administration or Congress, to conduct investigations for political purposes. He must have the integrity, the strength, and the fortitude to tell the president no, regardless of the consequences. In short, he must be willing to defend the independence of the Justice Department. So my questions will be, do you have that strength and commitment to be independent of the White House pressures you will undoubtedly face? Will you protect the integrity of the Justice Department above all else? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Well, Senator Hatch, welcome back. We truly miss you. You were a great chairman and an incredible member of this body, and you're very welcome to share your thoughts about Mr. Barr with this committee.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Feinstein as well, and members of the committee. It is my distinct pleasure to be here today to introduce William Barr, the President's nominee to be Attorney General of the United States. I have known and worked with Bill closely over the years, and I'm glad to call him a friend. Bill has had a distinguished career in public service and in the private sector. He started his career at the Central Intelligence Agency. While there, he went to law school part-time at George Washington University. Following graduation, he was selected for a prestigious clerkship with a federal judge on the D.C. Circuit before heading to private practice. Later, he served in the Reagan White House in the Office of Policy Development. Following another stint in private practice, Bill began his distinguished career at the Department of Justice under President George H.W. Bush. Bill served as the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel, then as Deputy Attorney General, and finally as Attorney General of the United States. As Attorney General, Bill oversaw a number of sensitive criminal investigations, including the investigation into the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing. He prioritized fighting violent crime and became known as the Law and Order Attorney General. Throughout his time at the Justice Department, Bill earned a reputation as a fierce advocate for the rule of law, as a principled and independent decision maker, and as a lawyer's lawyer. He has shown his commitment to the Constitution time and time again while serving our country. That is why he has been confirmed by the Senate unanimously 3 times. After completing his service at the DOJ, Bill returned to the private sector working at law firms and as counsel for some of America's largest companies. I could go on at length describing Bill's distinguished career. There is no question, none whatsoever, that Bill is well qualified to serve as Attorney General. He has held this position before and won high praise during his tenure for his fairness, his tenacity, and his work ethic. So instead of droning on about Bill's resume, I want to tell you about what Bill identifies as the most important achievement of his private service as Attorney General. At least I believe this is what he believes. I believe his answer tells you much about how he will approach the job and who he is. When asked what his most important accomplishment was as Attorney General, Bill does not point to one of his many policy successes. He doesn't talk about his role in setting antitrust merger guidelines. He doesn't say it was his role leading the DOJ's response to the savings and loans crisis. No, for him, it was something more. It was something more tangible. It was Talladega. 3 days after Bill was named acting Attorney General by President Bush, 121 prisoners noted and seized control of the Talladega Federal Correctional Institution in Alabama. This was a very serious matter. And they took 10 hostages. Planning at the DOJ began immediately for how best to resolve the situation and secure the safe release of the hostages. In such a situation, some would have sought political cover, not Bill. He was in charge. He knew the response was his decision to make, his responsibility. He maintained his focus on the safety of the men and women held hostage by the prisoners. The standoff lasted 10 days.